Hartelijk welkom allemaal op dit Impact Event rond Bellingcat. Welcome, all of you. We'll do this event in English since our guest speaks English. This is Impakt Center for Media Culture. We also organize the annual Impact Festival that you might know. Our entire annual program is dedicated to this idea of post-truth. How can we separate nonsense and manipulations from facts and fact-based opinions? How can we maintain reliable sources of information and platforms for debate in a world that's undergoing rapid changes in terms of technology and media? That's basically what we want to address this year. Our festival that will be organized from October 24 to 28 will have a special focus on the role of algorithms in this debate concerning post-truth. But in other parts, in other events during our annual program, we'll approach the theme from other angles, like tonight, which is all about new forms of journalism, research and fact-checking. Online fact-checking in a post-truth world, that's tonight's subtitle. In a world where truth seems to be more fluid, critical thinking and fact-checking has become more important than ever. Well, this is very much at the core of the business of our guest of tonight, Elliot Higgins. He's the founder and main person behind Bellingcat, the online research collective that you might have heard about. In the Netherlands, they're mostly in the news because of the MH17, but they're also very influential when it comes to fact-checking related to the conflict in Syria, to the terror of ISIS, etc. He will tell all about the methods that they are using, the kinds of technologies that they are using. We'll have a presentation by Elliot of about 1 hour, 50 minutes, 90 minutes in total maybe. After that there will be a Q&A in which we can engage in a conversation with Elliot Higgins. So without any further ado, I would like to ask you to welcome Elliot Higgins.
Hi everyone, I'm Elliot Higgins from Bellingcat. To explain the work of what we do with Bellingcat, I'm going to take you through some examples, but at the very basic level, we've split it into 3 parts. We identify information, we verify it, and then we amplify it. Now, identification of information can be anything from noticing a tweet on Twitter or actually digging through information. And that information can be anything from satellite imagery, online records, YouTube information. Verification is what I'm going to talk about mostly today, so we'll get to that. And then amplification is the final product. Once you've identified and verified information, that can be many different things, even with the same information, and I'll give you some more examples of that today. So I'm going to start off with a simple example of geolocation. This is one of the first videos I ever geolocated, and geolocation is basically a key verification methodology. It's looking at footage or photograph and figuring out exactly where it was taken so we can prove that the people who are making a claim about where it was taken are telling the truth. So this first video is from TG in Libya in 2011. The Libyan rebels had claimed they'd captured a town. They said it was this town TG in Libya, but how do we know where this was actually filmed? Well, what we usually do is we start looking at the kind of larger landmarks that help us narrow down where this could be. So they're claiming it's in the town of TG, so that's where we'll start looking. We're also going to be looking for a mosque with a dome and a minaret, and it's next to a road which has 2 lanes of traffic. It's wide enough to fit a tank down there. So we simply just have to go to Google Earth. You can also do this on Google Maps, but you can see a road running through the middle. That's a possible place to start looking. We can look at that. We see there's 2 lanes of traffic. We can see there's a divider. We can also see how wide the cars are to give us an idea of how wide it is. And if we follow it down, we eventually come to a mosque. It has a dome and a minaret. So that's given us a likely location of where this could be. And once we have these big details like the dome and minaret, we start looking at smaller details. So, for example, the wall that's near it, the various utility poles that are nearby, the shape of the road, and smaller details until we can be confident this is the correct location. So this is a very, very basic example of geolocation that anyone could do from their own home. This is a slightly more intensive version of it. Barrel bomb attacks in Syria, they've been happening since 2012, and what you're seeing here is actually a fairly historic video. As far as I'm aware, this is the first ever barrel bomb video. The only thing is, this looks like someone's pushed over a bin. It doesn't look very impressive. It barely looks like any kind of bomb at all. So you had sites like Russia Today calling it barrel bomb baloney, saying that no one would use these kind of munitions. With Syria, it was possible to track the use and the progress of the use of various munitions basically by watching YouTube videos that were posted by the Syrian opposition. So eventually this video was published. This shows a barrel bomb just as it's being thrown out of the rear of a helicopter. You can just make out there. And this video was published, which basically shows the same thing, but from inside the helicopter. So the barrel bomb's being lit with a cigarette, pushed out the rear, and we can see that tumbling to the ground. The thing is, this is shared online, and you have people saying, well, how do you know this is filmed in Syria? Well, what you have here is a aerial view of a town in Syria, and where else do you have that? Well, again, you can go to Google Earth, spend quite a long time searching, and you can in fact find the location in question. If we rotate the image, we can then do a side-by-side comparison, and we can see that these are the same locations based off the layout of the road and other details that are visible. So we can be 100% sure that it's also filmed in Syria and which town that barrel bomb was being dropped on. So this is another form of geolocation. We've been doing a lot of work with international bodies, including the International Criminal Court. I will warn everyone, this next section does have some graphic imagery on it. And it's about this arrest warrant that was issued by the International Court for this guy Wafali, who was serving under the army of General Haftar, one of the Libyan groups. In this situation, this is a really unusual arrest warrant because this is issued based off 6 Facebook videos that his group uploaded showing him executing people in Libya. And these are publicly available on Facebook. The locals think he's a hero because he's fighting at ISIS in Benghazi, but the International Criminal Court believes this is a violation of international law and issued this arrest warrant. What's important about this is not only it uses open source information, but these arrest warrants are usually issued years after the events have happened, not during the actual events as they're unfolding. So this unusually almost had a preventative step to it. But once we discovered this was based off open source videos, we decided to see if we could start geolocating any of them. So in this video, I'm going to take you through video number 6 in the sequence of videos that were published. So this was filmed from a static position. The camera was moving around. So one of the first things we did is we took all the various stills from the video when it's at different angles, and then we merged them into one image so we could basically see the whole area at once. And once we had that completed image, we started looking at details that we could use to narrow it down, like we did with the Libya example. And here we were looking at buildings that were in the distance, a wall, and a fork in the road. Not much to go on, but by looking at the social media page used by the same armed group, we could see they'd been fighting in an area in the previous weeks that looked very similar to what we could see in the video. And this was known as the Chinese building area. That was easy to find on maps of Benghazi. And we're able to zoom into the location in question here in Benghazi. And as you can see, it's quite a large area of partly constructed buildings. So we've narrowed down this area, but we're looking for those features where we can see an open space with buildings, a fork in the road, and a wall. And eventually, after quite a while, we came to this location. Now, what we were then able to do is, to confirm this is the location in question, we could move the camera using this satellite imagery and basically match the position of this camera with the camera in the video. So once this is in place, just look at the bushes at the top of the picture as we merge the 2 images together. You can see those bushes are into the same location. Now we have the location, we looked at the satellite image from the day of the execution, and these marks appeared on the image. And these marks are actually bloodstains from the execution that line up perfectly with what's visible in the video. So we're able to use, just from this video, we can establish the exact location this video was filmed. Once we've established the exact location, we know where the camera is, which means we can actually measure the shadows being cast by the individuals and use that as a kind of a sundial. So we can say pretty much precisely when this video was filmed. So we can see it was filmed on the morning of the day it was filmed. The execution was reportedly taking place on July 17th, and we can look at the satellite imagery from July 14th to 17th where we see those bloodstains appear. So we've been able to find the location, pretty much the exact time, and what is almost certainly the day of the execution. So this is all the information that we gather and we can feed back to bodies like the ICC. We also use it when we have social media campaigns by ISIS, and this is one of them. They encourage their supporters to hold a piece of paper up with the name of the European town they were in and the hashtag used by the social media campaign. So these were popping up on Telegram. All the journalists and researchers who kind of hide on ISIS Telegram were then tweeting them. I saw them, and I could see the first two. You won't be able to geolocate those. That's just some leaves. That's not geolocatable. That's clearly inside a shop, but you know, shops change, there's lots of shops, but this one is geolocatable. And when I saw this, I was actually busy doing my ironing, so I didn't have time to do it. But I have lots of Twitter followers who basically do this kind of stuff as their Sudoku, it's their hobby. Instead of doing crosswords, they do geolocation. So this was geolocated in 10 minutes. Because someone, this is in Munster in Germany, we know for a fact that Germans are very organized, which means that advertising poll we can see is listed on a German website. And you can search by town, and that gives you, you can search by type as well, so we can select all the advertising polls. That gives us this map of Munster. So again, we're doing what we're doing with the original example. We're taking the big thing we have and starting to narrow it down as much as we can. So now we have dozens of locations, but it's still better than all of Germany. And then we start looking at this imagery. This is high-resolution imagery from aircraft imagery on Google Earth. And we can zoom in, and we can start matching off details, like we do with any other geolocation. So we can say the camera's in this corner. We know that because we can see, obviously, the poles in that corner. But behind it, we can actually see the metal bars that are visible. We can see the stripes on the ground, and we can also see they match in direction as well. So here, the fixed stripe is on the left-hand side, so we know where the camera position is. We can see these poles, traffic lights, and more in the background, and lots of other details. So we're able to confirm very rapidly through crowdsourcing and open source information exactly where this was taken. And we had 4 photographs in total that were geolocatable out of this collection. 3 were done within about 10 minutes because we asked the question on social media, can anyone do it? The other one took an hour, but that's because they lied about where they were. And keep in mind, 2 of these photographs were taken from their apartment window as well, just pointing out their window down the street. So we were able to find the exact address of these ISIS supporters in Europe, just from the photographs that are posted online. And then what you get is a shifting messaging. The point of this was for ISIS to scare Europeans, that ISIS is everywhere. Instead, the headlines were saying ISIS members in Europe are really stupid because they give away their home addresses by posting photographs on social media. So it changes the entire narrative around this event, and it undermined a narrative that was being pushed by ISIS. Some other crowdsourced projects we've done is the Trace and Object Stop Child Abuse campaign that Europol's been running. So this has now been running for a year, and the idea behind the campaign is they've taken these items that were part of child abuse imagery, and they've asked the public, can you identify what these are? Because this can help us identify which countries these were taken in. So you've got all kinds of objects here, and at Bellingcat and also on Reddit, there were threads started and discussions started around these objects, seeing if we could ID them, just sharing the information out there to get people to look at them and maybe recognize what they were. And I believe out of over 100 objects that were posted on the Europol site in the last year, I think about 79 have been identified, and I think about a quarter of those led to specific countries where these objects came from. But that was simply asking on social media if anyone knows what this is. One of the most significant examples I found was this image that was published by Europol. This could be any hotel room anywhere in the world, and extremely rapidly someone recognized it, and they said, this is the hotel, I've stayed in it, it's in Mauritius, it's basically in the middle of the ocean, and yet they were able to find the exact hotel that this photograph was taken. So in another example, we had a BBC journalist asking if people could help geolocate this video. It was a family who had just moved to the British Virgin Islands just as Hurricane Irma hit, and they had vanished. And no one knew where they were. They hadn't given their new address to their family. So all they had was this video posted on WhatsApp before they disappeared. So we know they're in the British Virgin Islands, and we have this video. So how do we figure out exactly where they are? So basically our task was to get the family in touch with their family in the UK somehow with this video. So the first thing that's noticeable here is in the distance you can see the shape of these islands in the distance. And using Google Earth, you actually have a terrain view. So if you spend enough time looking around the British Virgin Islands, looking out from the coasts, you'll find a match to this. So we can zoom into the location in question. And we can place the camera on the ground and point it towards these islands that are in the distance. And this is a 3D representation of that terrain. So what I need is something that's an actual photograph. But this is a good clue that this is the location I should be looking into. So one platform we use a lot of Bellingcat is called EchoSec. Unfortunately, this is a paid platform, but it's a very useful tool because it allows you to search for geotagged images in any location in the world. So here I was looking for reference images. So what it found for me is a Flickr account of someone who'd taken this photograph, and I could download it at a really lovely high resolution to see all the details. And you can see here, it just has that same appearance. But that doesn't tell us exactly where this house is. It tells us it's on that side of the island, and the camera can be pointing south. So it doesn't tell us everything we need. But what I started looking at are other details. So we can see the roof. It's made out of wood. It has a certain distinct style to it, and also the handrail here is also made out of wood with a particular style to it. What that told me is it was a commercial. It was a residential home, or most likely a residential home. So I started looking at the area. So this basically area of coastline is where you could see those islands from. So this first place, Pockwood Pond, looks like an industrial estate. Unlikely. Over here, you would have seen the boats in the foreground. So it basically left this area. And if we zoom in, we can actually see there's lots of houses here with swimming pools and driveways. It's the kind of place you would want to live, especially if you've got lots of money, because there were no other street view images, no other photographs. So I started looking through estate agents and various rental websites until I could find photographs of all the houses that had been rented and for sale there. And most of them had been. And this is one of the houses in question. And it had lots of lovely photographs, including photographs of this handrail, which look pretty much identical. The colour's a bit different, but it looks the same. We also have the roof, which is also a similar design. Now, looking at all the houses in this area, they all were unique designs. Looking at the estate agents and the various other sites, they all had different designs inside. So they didn't have the same banisters. They were all unique. But I had a problem because no matter how I looked at these photographs, and this is from the estate agent site, it just didn't fit. There was stuff missing in the wrong place. It just didn't match what was visible in the video. But then I realized something. There's only 2 houses in this entire area which have the same design. The left-hand red house is the one we're looking at. The one next door with the additional swimming pool is another house next door which looks identical from above, apart from the swimming pool. So I made an educated guess that this could be the house they were actually in, built to the same design. So we got the estate agent number on the left-hand side, gave that to the BBC journalist who gave it to the family, called up, and the estate agent said, yes, I've just rescued your family from the house next door. So using that short 11-second grainy video, we were able to find the exact location of this missing family in about an hour in my house in Leicester. So this is how far you can go with this kind of information. And we can find missing people. We can also hunt Nazis, which is always fun. So this is the Charlottesville White Nationalist March. And this is a moment that was caught of 3 white nationalists attacking someone. And we wanted to find out who this guy was. Now, it's a blurry photograph. You can't really see too much. So the first thing we did is we went through all the footage that was posted online, all the photographs, and catalogued it, and started searching for every single one for this guy. And eventually we found this guy walking around in one of the videos. Now, first of all, we can see he's wearing this plaid shirt, so it's a similar shirt. We can also see he's wearing a white helmet, and he's customized that white helmet, which is very useful for us. If this was like just the normal design that was on that helmet, it was like a logo that was always there, then it would be less confidence that there's a match. But because we can see, these various symbols that he's added to the helmet, off-center, quite amateurish scrawls in some cases, we can be almost certain this is the same person. But that doesn't tell us who he is. We still don't know who he is, so we look through more images. And we find this photograph from the night before, and we start looking at him. How do we know he's the same guy? Well, he's got all these moles and birthmarks that are in exactly the same position. Often we talk about when we're our certainty around something. We might be talking about a house or a mosque in TG in Libya, and we look down to the smallest details, the position of trees, poles. We might be talking about a military vehicle, and we're looking for the markings on the same side of that vehicle. It's the same with people. You're looking at markings on them to make sure they're the same person. If any of you ever follow any of the stuff on the white helmets that's going around on social media, a lot of people have this trick where they get a photo of a jihadi and a similar looking white helmets member and say it's the same person. And in many cases, it's just not. And this is the level of detail you need to be sure that someone's the same person. So you can look at the shape of the ear as well. You can also see he's wearing the same dog tag chain too. That still doesn't tell us who he is. So what we started doing then is looking at the people around him. Because we assumed if you were going to go to a white nationalist march, you'd probably go with your friends. So fortunately, these two people had already been identified by someone on social media. And because someone's done something on social media, it doesn't mean it's true. So using this, because we can see these are kind of Facebook profiles, we can just go to Facebook and search for these people. So the first guy, Jacob, he's lots of pictures on his profiles. We've got clear photographs of him. It's really obvious to make out it's the same person. His friend Ryan is even easier because of his neck tattoo. But Ryan has kept his friend list private, so we can't see who he's friends with. But Jacob hasn't, and we can see he's friends with Ryan. And then we can start looking for Jacob's list to see if there's anyone else of interest. And eventually we come across this guy. Dan Doc Borden, as he describes himself, he has posted lots of photographs of him looking very pleased with himself on Facebook, as you can see, but they're also very useful for us. We can see that he's friends with Jacob, we can see he's friends with Ryan. So we've got this little triangle of friends now, supporting fascism, basically. We can find photographs of Jacob and Dan Borden, and we can see again clearly the dog tag, the marks. Everything's there. We can be 100% sure this is the same person. So we know who this person is, but what does that mean? Well, that means that he can then be arrested. He's just recently, after several months of being in jail, has now been found guilty of assault, and he will be spending some time in prison. But it's possible to identify these people who are involved with this assault using social media, their own social media pages, because of the information they share. We've also done a lot of work looking at the Russian bombing of Syria that began in September 2015. So in the initial stages of the campaign, in the initial week basically, Russia was saying they were just there to bomb ISIS. And that anyone who doubted them should not listen to the Pentagon, but listen to the Russian Ministry of Defense. And in a way, that's what we did. Because Russia was publishing lots of videos online showing their airstrikes across Syria. And we examined these videos. And there actually was a group of people on Twitter, just 5 or 6 people, whose hobby it is to geolocate videos like this. Similar to how we did the barrel bomb example. But they were looking at every single one of these videos and trying to be the first person to figure out exactly where it was filmed. From the first 30 videos that were filmed, claiming to be ISIS targets, so these were on YouTube, on the Russian Ministry of Defense's YouTube channel, saying this is ISIS being bombed. Based off those geolocations, we discovered only one of them was actually filmed in ISIS-held territory. Now, you might be thinking, well, how do you know who controls what territory? Well, again, we asked the Russian Ministry of Defense, and they gave us this handy little map, which they also put online, that shows who controls what. So with that, we could actually go into Google Earth, overlay it inside Google Earth, sketch around it, and remove the map. And we had this really useful overlay showing us who controlled what according to Russia at the time they started their bombing. So obviously the big grey area is ISIS, greens non-ISIS groups, and the red to the north are kind of pro-Kurdish groups. So here's one example of one of the bombings we investigated. This was described as an ISIS facility being bombed by the Russian government. We can actually zoom into the location in question, and straight away you'll see we're zooming past the ISIS-controlled territory, according to Russia, and we come to this location. And this is not an ISIS facility, it's not an ISIS territory. In fact, it's a bakery run by the charity, the IHH, they had bombed and called an ISIS facility. So this is just one of many case studies where they were just simply lying about what they were attacking, what targets they were. I've seen water treatment plants being described as oil refineries by the Russian and all kinds of things like that. Something else we looked into was the Russian use of cluster bombs in Syria. Now, Syria has repeatedly, I I was about to say repeated lie, it's true, but they've denied using cluster bombs. There's lots of video footage of cluster bomb use in Syria. It's obvious they are, but Russia joined in and said we're not using cluster bombs either. And in fact, there's not even such munitions at Russia's airbase in Syria. So this time we searched the Russian media for photographs from Russia's airbase in Syria. So the wire agencies, Russia Today, Sputnik, had been taken to have a little tour of the area. And we were able to find photographs like this. Just in the corner are RBK 500 AO 2.5 RTM cluster bombs. And this is a photograph from Sputnik's wire service. So this is the Russian media. And after the siege of Aleppo, Russia went in. These are photographs on the Russian Ministry of Defense's own Facebook page showing basically unexploded munitions being disposed. And they put them in this trench. And what do we have in the trench? It's the exact time of cluster bomb that was seen at the Russian air base in Syria, except this time it's now been dropped on Aleppo. So this is an example of another Russian denial.
قام طيران الحرب الروسي بشن إغارة على مدينة سرنين. فتبين أنه الغارة استهدفت مدرسة هي ملاصقة للمشفى الميداني، ولله الحمد أن المدرسة كانت خارجة عن العمل بسبب القصف السابق بالمدرسة. وكان الدفاع المدني كانت قبل ما تشن الغارة بثواني دقائق عم تطلب من الناس أنه تروح من المنطقة. وأنا بالموقع عم بصور الغارة. فهون شن الطيران فالضرب في الموقع اللي أنا فيه على قعد مترين أو 3 أمتار بالصاروخ مني. أول ما وقع الصاروخ أنا حسيت إن جسمي بده يتمزق من الضغط. مقابل الأرض كل الناس عم تسمع صوت عياط والناس ما منتبه علي إنه في هون وقع مصاب. كان في شظية بالصدر وحروق بإيد اليسار وشظايا بإيد اليمين وإجر اليسار، بالإضافة إلى رطوب في كل الجسم والصدر وشق كبير بالفك السفلي، إضافة إلى شق بالعين. الله أكبر! أنت مضطر أنك تتوجه للموقع، سواء أنت كعملك كموصي أو أنت عملك كرجل منقذ أو مسعف، لأنه في ناس بحاجتك.
So following reports of that airstrike, it was covered in the Western media, which is, for the amount of hospital attacks there were, is fairly unusual. So the Russian Ministry of Defense put out imagery that they claimed showed the area was undamaged. And Russia Today shared what the Russian Ministry of Defense was claiming.
It was recently alleged that Russian jets destroyed a hospital in the city of Samin, causing the Russian Defense Ministry to, well, call on journalists to double-check the stories they publish.
I call on the respected mass media not to jeopardize their reputation by publishing fakes like this.
But it's not just the media. The accusations are actually picked up by the US State Department. And to prove the hospital is totally intact, the Russian Defense Ministry provided up-to-date satellite photographs.
The building on this image, dated October 31st, does not look like it was recently bombed. How can we tell if it's the hospital in Sarmin? A year ago, a video was posted on YouTube that shows the hospital under construction. Here's a screenshot from that year-old video. And here is the Russian Defense Ministry's aerial image of what it says is the hospital. We see a similar dome-shaped structure next to the building on both images. We see a wall or a fence positioned in a similar way. So where exactly is the hospital that Russia is accused of hitting?
So I like it when there's 2 different versions of events and open source information where we can check them. So first we need to check where is this location that's on the satellite imagery. Well, it is in fact in the town in question, and we can see that the Russian imagery lines up quite nicely with it. So The next question is, does the white helmets footage match up with that location? Because we've got to confirm both sides of the story. So here we can see the footage on the left-hand side. The hospital is just off to the left. So at the end of the video, you actually see him retreating into the building. If we zoom in, we can see the camera is pointing to the north. We can see where he stood when the explosion happens. But what's important is what's in the background here. So this is after the first airstrike has happened, so he's rushed to the scene. And we can see in this satellite imagery on the right-hand side, this image is from before the airstrike took place. And we can see the very regular shape of a small building, which is visible here. We can see 4 poles casting shadows, which is visible here. And behind that, a wall, which is also visible. So if we go back to the footage, we can see the pole here and the wall here, and the bomb lands about the center of this photograph, still. So what we had then is footage from after the second airstrike, and it showed the damage that had been done in that airstrike. So again, the right-hand image is from before the airstrikes occurred. So the camera is pointing north. That nice regular building is now that pile of rubble. We can see at least 2 of those poles have been knocked over, and we can see the wall has been completely destroyed. So if we look at the Russian image, what do we see? Well, the hospital's there, but the building that we can see is completely destroyed is still standing. The 4 poles, 2 of them which are knocked over, are still standing. The wall is still standing. What's happened here is the Russians have used imagery from before the airstrike occurred to claim the airstrike didn't happen, and we can prove that using open source information. Another similar denial about another hospital that was bombed. This was presented by the Russian government. They were accused of bombing another hospital, and they claimed that their aerial imagery showed that the hospital was undamaged, and this is what they presented. It's pretty blurry, poor quality imagery. And they made the statement that there are no changes to the facility that can be observed, and effectively that meant everyone was lying about it being bombed. I looked into this and I discovered there were actually 3 separate bombings reported in that location over a period of a week. And this video from October 1st shows the aftermath of one of these bombings. So that's the hospital building there. You can see that crater in the middle of the road, just about 20 meters away, maybe 10, 20. So it's a near miss. They're going to feel it, but that is not going to level the hospital. So the Al Jazeera Arabic presenter takes us around the back of the hospital. And here, on this back wall, there's something rather useful. There is a security camera. And it's one of a network of security cameras that was running 2 days later on October 3rd. And this is the opposite angle of what we've just been seeing. So we can now sync 4 cameras together and show the moment of the bombing 2 days later. So all these videos I've managed to establish the position of inside and outside the building. So I know these are definitely all from that hospital. And you can see the level of damage to this part of the building just from this before and after. But most significantly is the damage outside. This is basically the same position as that previous crater 2 days earlier. So you can see this time they've dropped a much larger bomb. It's damaged the hospital. Again, if this had actually hit the building, that building would have been completely destroyed. But it certainly puts the building out of action. The question is then, how come we can't see any differences on this imagery? So have they given us wrongly dated imagery again? Well, this time we have satellite imagery from around the same dates, showing the same location, and we can compare what we can see there to what we can see in the other images. And what's interesting is you can actually see damage in the Russian imagery. If you look at this area, we can see this small building where the corners collapsed. You can see that in the Russian image. It's blurry and low resolution for some reason, but it's there. You can also see this white roof. That's actually a tin roof that collapsed. That's also caught on video footage. And we can even see just about the kind of scarring on the road from the crater. So this time, rather than lying about the date of the imagery, they've just lied about what your eyes can actually see in this image. Now, this isn't all going to be about Russia. Next, we have an example related to an airstrike that happened in March 16th, 2017. So the White Helmets had reported there had been an airstrike, and there was lots of reports that civilians had been killed. It was on a mosque. It was just before evening prayers. A really terrible attack. But everyone reporting on the ground initially was saying this must be a Russian or Syrian airstrike. But then we discovered this. This photograph was posted online showing debris from the airstrike. And this is not from a Russian munition. This is from an American Hellfire missile. So debris from an American missile was being dug out, this mosque that had been destroyed. This is obviously, very unusual for Syria. We know, stuff like this happens in Afghanistan quite frequently and is never reported on. The thing is, in Syria, you've got people who've spent the last 5 years being bombed and documenting it, and they were producing a lot of content and putting it online. And quite quickly, US Central Command put out information saying an Al-Qaeda in Syria meeting location had been bombed, killing several terrorists. But the information we were getting was showing something completely different. Dozens of civilians killed in a mosque before the call to prayer. So the Americans put out another image. This time they were saying that they believed dozens of Al-Qaeda terrorist leaders were killed. So those several terrorists have just got an upgrade. But they're saying this is the mosque in question, and this mosque was not bombed. And they're correct, this is a mosque that wasn't bombed, but we discovered, working with Human Rights Watch and an organisation called Forensic Architecture, what really happened, piecing together all the open source information, interviewing people on the ground. And I'm going to show you a video now of Forensic Architecture put together, showing what we discovered.
On March 16, 2017, at around 6:55 p.m., a U.S. airstrike targeted Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab Mosque in El Jina, in the province of Aleppo, Syria, while almost 300 people were gathering for the Isha night prayers. The Syrian Civil Defense, also known as the White Helmets, claimed to have recovered the bodies of 38 civilians. 5 of them were children. The U.S. Central Command claimed responsibility for the airstrike, stating, U.S. forces conducted an airstrike on an Al-Qaeda in Syria meeting on March 16th, killing several terrorists, wrongly locating it in Idlib, Syria. The following day, the Pentagon released an image of the building after the strike, claiming it was a partially constructed community meeting hall, that dozens of core Al-Qaeda terrorists were killed, that they deliberately did not target the mosque at the left edge of the photo, and that initial assessments did not indicate civilian casualties. Our investigation seeks to establish what was the use of the building, were there civilian casualties, and how did the incident unfold in time and space. Using available and sourced imagery, videos, satellite photographs, and survivor testimonies, we began analyzing the building before and after the strike. We have identified 2 large craters in the north part of the building. Munitions experts confirmed they are consistent with 2 500-pound bombs. We obtained a video of the building recorded 2 months prior to its destruction. On the roof is the adhan speaker used for the call to prayer. A sign next to the entrance reads, Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab Mosque. We asked a local photographer to document the interior after the strike. The mosque's entrance sign is still by the door. Shelves for worshippers' shoes indicate it is a mosque, as do the rugs in the mihrab, where the imam leads the prayer, which clearly indicate that, contrary to U.S. statements, the building is a large and fully functioning mosque. We interviewed and exchanged architectural plans with the building's original contractor and caretaker, who was also wounded in the strike. The upper floor, he said, contained the imam's flat. His wife was at home and was killed in the strike. The ground floor contained the main prayer hall in the south, as well as the ritual washing room, the toilets, the kitchen, and the winter prayer hall in the north part. The strike took place just as a religious seminar in the Winter Prayer Hall was finishing up. Some 40 to 50 people were still there. Others were gathering in the main prayer hall in preparation for the night prayer. A video taken during the construction of the building verifies witness testimonies regarding the layout and use of each room. There were no doors enclosing the Winter Prayer Hall in the north, making it an unlikely place of an Al-Qaeda senior leader meeting. Two bombs hit the northern part of the building. A large number of people started to flee the building. As they evacuated, they were targeted by several missiles. An anonymous U.S. official confirmed the use of 4 Hellfire missiles. We interviewed the director of the White Helmets Rescue Operation, Mohammed Hallaq.
أنا محمد الحلاق قائد قطاري في حلب الغربي بالدفاع المدني.
Hallaq described seeing 20 to 30 people scattered between the building and the road. Other witnesses confirmed this account. After the first strike, people went outside, and as they fled, they were struck in the streets. The plane was monitoring the place. It wanted to kill everyone who tried to get out. Those who immediately fled, people from surrounding areas who came to the rescue, they all got hit outside and torn into pieces. Many died in that strike. While sharing screens over Skype calls, Hallaq told us where they found victims within the rubble. 11 people were injured. They were found in these locations. 8 people inside the building died as a result of the 2 blasts. We know the location of 7.
أيوة هون نعم هون أخرجنا شخص طفل أخرجناه الساعة 3 بالليل تقريبا عايش حتى في التصوير موجود يعني.
In this clip, Hallaq is seen pulling out 14-year-old Muhammad Arabi. He later died of his injuries. We found and analyzed markings on the road that indicate the traces of Hellfire missiles, identifiable by their distinct fragmentation pattern and by remnants found nearby. This confirms witness testimonies regarding secondary strikes on evacuees.
So, once we were about to publish that, Human Rights Watch sent their copy of their version of the report to US Central Command, who gave us their response. So they were saying that they could acknowledge that the draft Human Rights Watch report could not have taken into account the classified information available to the US authorities. And that's why the US investigation reached a different conclusion. So they concluded that it wasn't a mosque, and we concluded it was a mosque, is effectively what we're saying, and it was full of civilians, and they're saying it's full of Al-Qaeda. A couple of weeks after we published our report, they actually decided they had actually bombed a mosque. There had been a target misidentification because of a shift change. They still insisted it was full of Al-Qaeda, that only 1 child died, but that entire investigation was only based off talking to US Army personnel. It didn't include looking at any of the open source information, contacting people on the ground, or any of the analysis that we were doing with Forensic Architecture and Human Rights Watch. So, as you all know, MH17 is one of the biggest cases we've worked on, so I'm going to go through how we came to our various conclusions about this. So we're starting off, first of all, with this photograph. It was one of a number taken on July 17th, 2014. So how do we know where this photograph was taken? Well, when it was first reported on, they claimed it was in a town, and it turned out to be in the wrong town, so that didn't help. But what we can do is look at the phone number. Now, this phone number was called up by a lot of people when it was published, and the person who answered the phone said he owned the vehicle yard this truck was taken from, separatists had taken it over, and the paint job was unique. which was all interesting information. After about the third or fourth phone call, he turned his phone off. But that phone number, we could search on Google and find this website and the phone number along with an address. So now we take that address and we can go to Donetsk and we can zoom in. And we can find the vehicle yard in question quite easily. And we can double check if it's the correct location, because if we go to Street View, we can in fact see the same phone number that's on the side of the truck visible. And then we have the second video. This was claimed to be filmed at a very specific location at a specific time on a tweet. So again, we have to double check this information. So he's saying it's filmed on July 17th at 11:40 at specific coordinates. Well, it's a bit hard to check the time and location. We looked into this. It was a new video, not published before. But again, we can use satellite imagery to zoom into the location in question. And we can see there's a number of apartment buildings here. So again, we do a simple geolocation of matching off the various features that are visible on the building. So the structure on top, the structure on the ground, the post, and you can see actually the long shadow it's casting, the layout of the roads. So again, we can confirm this is the correct location as claimed in the tweet. So the question is, how can we figure out where that is? Well, what someone did is they now had these two locations, and they made the assumption that maybe they'd driven directly between those 2 points using the quickest route. So he used route finding software to calculate the fastest route, and then, I'm glad to say this wasn't me, he then switched to Street View and basically drove down the entire road using that route, checking for matches between what he could see here, and eventually he managed to find the location in question. Fortunately, it was inside Donetsk, so he didn't have to go too far. But this is a location in question, and we can see here from the Street View imagery, we can see a billboard next to some trees. How do you know this is the precise location? Well, again, we break out colored boxes, and we start matching off things like the position of cables, how they're attached to different things. But here, the clearest thing are actually the leaves in the background. Now, people don't often think about this, but trees actually don't change that much, at least the twigs and the branches don't, over a period of time. Leaves grow and fall off, but branches are usually in the same position unless they've been damaged. And here, if you spend a really long time looking at these images, like I did, you can actually see all the branches are in the correct position. We also then had journalists who were on the ground going to these locations and filming and further confirming that we were correct about the locations where these were filmed. So this is just two examples, but we kept searching because there were more images and more locations, and we wanted to know where this missile launcher had been on July 17th, 2014. So we're now moving into the next location in Torres. And what we had here was just a single photograph. And here to geolocate this, we had to take a slightly different route. We can see the missile launcher very clearly. It's on a truck with the same paint job. We can see there's a yellow sign on the side with something painted on it. But this is the sign we're interested in. Even though it's partly obscured to someone who speaks Russian, they can make out what that word possibly could be. We have a suspected town it's in, so you take the word of the shop it could be and the name of the town and you Google it. And it gives you a wiki that someone's set up for streets in eastern Ukraine. And it lists the name of the shop, it lists the name of the street, 50 years of the Soviet Union street, and we can plug that back into Google, and that gives us a document talking about a fight that took place in the shop. It's a legal record of that fight, and it gives the full address. So now we can actually go to the location in question and find this location. The camera's on the bottom left-hand side in that garage forecourt. But how can you be really sure this is the same location? Well, in this next video, keep an eye out for the sign and this building with the stripes on the side, because some people have unusual hobbies and they can be very useful for us. So one person has the unusual hobby of driving around eastern Ukraine, taping everything on his dashboard camera and loading it onto YouTube, and then listing all the streets he's been on. So when we searched for that street, this video came up. This is a much longer video, but this is just the most important part. I won't show you the whole thing. So we got the two buildings that we recognized from before, and it actually came past this same location twice. So we can actually see now the garage forecourt where the photograph was taken and the two buildings in question on the left-hand side. And because these videos are so long, we can go back and watch it from start to finish and geolocate every single second of this video. And that confirms the location. And again, we had journalists going out there recreating the scene. And we also have shadows. And similar to the example that we had with the Wafali execution, we can use those shadows to get an approximate time of day. So based off that, we think it was around there about 12:30. So We also tested how quickly you could get between those two locations. Now, this is going to be in a convoy, there's other circumstances, so we're just looking for a ballpark figure. So we have the Zores location, which was supposed to be 11:40, and this location about 12:30. Should take about 35 minutes. This is just, if it was 2 minutes or 20 hours, then we knew there would be a problem, but it was in the correct kind of ballpark figure we were looking for. So now we have 3 locations identified. We have the location in the western Donetsk. We can now see it going through Zores and then finally in Torres. And now we end with 2 final images in the east of the route. Now, what's different here is we have 1 photograph on the left and a video on the right, and the missile launcher is moving under its own power. You can actually still see the netting in the left-hand side photograph that was visible in the other images. So the question is now, where was this taken? The first one on the left was really easy because they gave the full address details, so that took no time at all. And again, we had people go out and take photographs recreating the scene. The right-hand one was one I crowdsourced the answer to. I saw this video and I thought that is discoverable. The original video had the town name, so I just said, can anyone find this? And within 5 minutes, I had 20 answers pointing to the same location. So this is where the photograph was taken. The camera was here, the missile launcher was here. And just to the east of this road is 2 lanes of traffic separated by trees. Now, we can see in the video that there's not these big tall buildings aren't there. But if we start looking towards the south as we go out to town, we can see the 2 lanes, but we can see it's an area that matches, and we can see this red roof building. And this building is important because if you actually watch the video, just in the distance, you can see a large building with a red roof. And there's not many of those in the local area. But that's just a clue to where it could be. So now we start looking at smaller details. So just to the north of that building, there's a road that heads to the west, and it joins those 2 lanes. Just to the south of that, there's a tree you can see there casting a shadow, and then another road. So on the video, can we see 2 roads with a tree in between? And in fact, you can just see that there. Ooh, the animation plays too slowly. So the next question we ask is, why is the camera so high up? Well, we can see that because at the bottom of the top of the road, there's apartment buildings that the photograph could be taken from. So it gives us that vantage point. Establishing if the vantage point is real is also important. Just because you can't see it, you still have to prove it's there. Otherwise, this is just some guy floating around in the air taking photographs, which would be strange. But you can get this side-by-side comparison. You can get a rough idea of what it looks like. And then you start looking at the smaller details and revisiting it again and again. So just using videos and photographs posted on social media, we've tracked the missile launcher from Donetsk in the west all the way over to where it was unloaded and seen travelling south out of the town. And this was the last sighting on July 17th of a photograph or video of the missile launcher. But we had other posts that were made online. People saw that missile launcher as it was driving through that town, and they told their friends, and their friends posted on social media about it. Some of them did it themselves. And what was important is this was happening before MH17 was shot down, before it was a big news story, before it was a subject of propaganda and lies. So these examples of people discussing it as it was happening is actually very useful. And this was one very important tweet, or VK.com message. This is the first ever sighting of the missile launcher on that day. So they're saying here, bad news, around 9 a.m. a hauler was going along the Mikivka highway from Mikivka in the direction of Donetsk. So what they're actually saying here is we were seeing the missile launcher leaving Donetsk. This is actually as it's arriving in the morning. So it's arrived and then left. So this is a bit of extra information about the route. So it's saying it's part of a convoy. And just to give you an idea of where it's coming, it's come from Mikivka. There's a highway that runs all the way down here. It would have passed the location we looked at before where we had the billboards. And then it's continued on, according to the tweet, down this boulevard, and it stopped at this intersection. Late last year, the Joint Investigation Team published this photograph. And they asked the public if they could help find where it was. And they said they believed it was in Mikivka. It wasn't. This is a photograph of that exact moment described in that social media post, with the vehicle parked at the side of the road at that boulevard. How do we know that? Well, we saw this photograph, and because we knew the route and how it was described, this looked at like that moment. So the first thing we checked is, could we use Street View to find any matching features? Well, just underneath the vehicle, you can see this railing of the park that's in that same location. But that wasn't enough to be, that could be any railing anywhere in the world. There's also this brickwork on the side of the road. That's not actually just that's not a pavement with one level higher than the other. That's just a separator. So you can see the gaps in the bricks on both sides. But that still wasn't good enough. So at this point, we have lots of people you know in Ukraine who are happy to go out and take photographs for us. And it turns out lots of other people did as well. So we had a photographer go out to this location looking for features that we could use to identify it. When he got there, he said there were 4 or 5 other people doing exactly the same thing. One of them was Rudy Boomer, a Dutch journalist who sent someone out and got his own photographs. So we had multiple photographs of this location. And what was important were these 2 rocks here. Because the wear on the rock, the damage on the rock is absolutely identical. And we've got it from multiple angles so we can be sure. Also, the tree bark is the same pattern as well. So we can be 100% sure that this photograph shows that scene that was described on that social media post, even though there's nearly 4 years between them when they were actually shared. Another important video that was released later on, this was released, I think, in 2016. It's a low-resolution cropped video. We actually have the high-resolution version of this video, and we've had it for a very long time. But we only just are able to talk about it because the Joint Investigation Team used it in their video. But this is the low-resolution version. So what you're actually seeing here is the same convoy. So they've described the vehicles in the convoy that you can see. You can actually see it in the other videos. Here's the missile launcher in question. There's the Jeep they're talking about, the UAV. Why do we think this is filmed on July 17th? Well, we can see a petrol station. That petrol station has prices on it. The website of the petrol station was archived on July 17th, 2014. You have these archiving websites. I don't know who did that, because it's kind of a rather specific date to archive it on. But what that means is that website has all the petrol prices on that day listed. So we can basically go through that sign and the website from July 17th, 2014 and match up all the prices. To make us even more sure, we have this image. This is a satellite image published by Stratfor. This is commercial satellite imagery. Anyone can get their hands on it. They just need to know where to look. And this shows various details. So this is the missile launcher in question. This satellite image was actually taken within probably less than a minute of that video being filmed. So that is like a 1 billion in 1 chance, because these satellite images aren't taken every single day in every single location in the world. So the fact it caught this convoy as it was traveling along is a near miracle, and launched various conspiracy theories. But you can see little details, like you can see the shadow cast by the missile launcher in the video is very tall, and you can see that same large shadow cast in the satellite image. You can also see vehicles parked in the video visible in the satellite imagery as well. So the vehicles at the petrol station, because it's so close between the 2 times, they're still there. And if you look at the longer piece of footage, you see more and more examples of exactly where all these vehicles were parked on the day. So what we have now is the route of the missile launcher. And that, of course, travels to the launch site and launches the missile. And what we have here is a photograph showing the trail of smoke from the missile launch. Now, it was actually a much darker photograph, but to make the smoke clearer, someone lightened it. And that wasn't very helpful because everyone knew it was a dark, cloudy day on July 17th when MH17 was shot down. And the fact that the earlier image looked like a blue, sunny day made people say, well, that's obviously fake. But what happened is the person who took the photograph sent it to his friend who couldn't see the smoke very well, so he lightened it and then shared that on social media, launching a conspiracy theory. We actually got the original photographs from the photographer. All the metadata matches to the time. We've had it forensically analyzed. There's nothing dodgy about it. This is a second photograph that was taken. It's actually the first in the sequence where he had auto-focused on the lines in front of this house, so then he zoomed in underneath it. But we were able to geolocate this. It was quite straightforward to do. It was this apartment building just north of Torres. The thing is, then we have the direction of the smoke. We can say the smoke is in this direction. So we just start following that line and seeing if there's anything interesting along that line that appeared on satellite imagery after July 17th. And we discover this, a corner of a field that has been ploughed out. And that's not normally how you would plough a field. You tend to do the whole thing at once. So we're having a look at that, and we noticed that on the July 16th image on the left-hand side, there was no ploughing in that field. And a few days later, on the first available image, the rest was obscured by cloud. We can see the corners being ploughed. And the Joint Investigation Team, in their September 28, 2016 press conference, published another photograph they found on social media showing the smoke. I have to admit, we were all extremely jealous that they found another photograph of the smoke on social media, because we had spent the best part of 2 years looking. So bit of jealousy there. But we also had other sources. We had this from the US government claiming this was the flight path of the missile that shot down MH17 based off their radar data, their satellite detection systems. And that's a really badly done image. It's low resolution satellite imagery. You can barely see where that line's coming from. It's a really thick line. It's almost useless. But I really wanted to see where that line was pointing to. Because if that's not pointing to the same field, then something dodgy is going on. And as we've learned, it's worth double checking what the Americans are saying. So what we did here is we identified some of these objects as lakes and other points of interest. And we would draw a line between two of them and make sure it intersected the starting point of that line. And then we could map that into Google Earth. And then zoom in on Google Earth to see exactly where that line pointed to. And it just happened it was exactly the same field that the smoke pointed to and the other information pointed to. And we repeated this multiple times to see if it pointed anywhere else, and it always pointed around that location. You then also had social media posts being made by people describing what had happened within minutes of the rocket being launched. Now, what's useful here, these social media profiles, you can look and see what they talk about, where they live. They say, talking to a friend, I live in this place. And then when they say, oh, I saw something in this direction, you've got their likely location and the direction they're pointing to. And in every case where we could identify where they were pointing to, it pointed towards that field. So there's multiple pieces of information pointing to that field. Later on, even the Joint Investigation Team had intercepted phone calls made around that field discussing the transport of the missile launcher. Journalists went to the field and spoke to local people. The local farmer said his field had been on fire on July 17th for some reason, so he had to plow it out. So we have the route, we have the launch site, and now this video from the next day. This was published by the Ukrainian Ministry of Interior, showing the missile launcher, and this time it's missing a missile. We can actually see it's the same, or it looks like the same truck that we've seen elsewhere. So we've gone all the way from here, from Donetsk, over to the east, and we're now seeing it close to the Russian border in the town of Luhansk. And in fact, what we have here is the Ukrainian Ministry of Interior, who posted this video, also supplied coordinates to the location. So again, we have to double check that. So that's the location in question, and fortunately in this town they have traffic cameras. And these traffic cameras had been used by various people to basically spy on Russian forces entering Ukraine and the movements of separatist forces, and people were documenting it. So rather unsportingly, the local Luhansk People's Republic turned the cameras off before MH17 was shot down. But what they didn't do is remove the preview images. So I could look in the code of the website and find the preview images from a week beforehand, and this is that very same intersection. The camera is basically pointing in the same direction, just higher up. And you can always make out some matching details, so the sign with the car on it, you can just make it out. But there's lots of billboards in this world. So what else can we find? Well, we can actually move the position of the camera forwards onto the road. And we can see these buildings in the background. And these are useful because we can again zoom in even closer using street view imagery. Because in the background of the video, it's very blurry and hard to see, but you can see these colored shapes. And these colored shapes are the roofs, the chimney, and the roofs and the walls there. So even though individually these are all a bit blurry and hard to see, taken together, we start getting an idea of where this is taken. I spoke earlier about the position of the camera. So where's the camera? Well, at the start of the video, we can see a window frame. It's overlooking some trees, and you can see that same view here. So this is the direction the camera's pointing based off the imagery that we can see so far. So you can see the billboards and the stuff in the background. Then people in the local area went out and started taking photographs of the area. So that gave us more detailed photography from the ground, more up-to-date imagery. One thing that was interesting was this utility pole that had a little electronics box that had the cover pulled off. So that's actually something that's going to be fairly unusual. And you can actually see in the video that same cover, that same electricity cover that's been pulled off on that piece of the street furniture in exactly the correct position. We can see things like the curb is pretty much the same. It's a bit hard to see through the leaves, but it's still there. And the billboard is exactly the same. So we're able to confirm that the last sighting was this missile launcher minus a missile heading out of the town, just using this open source information. The question was then, if a Buk missile launcher shot down MH17, where did it come from? Well, lots of people on social media were hunting out these videos and sharing them. And these were some examples. This is from Russia in June 2014. And there were lots of videos of Buk missile convoys. So we became very interested in these, and this is the power of crowdsourcing. Just some random person on Twitter pointed out that this missile launcher, the markings look kind of similar to the one we could see in that first photograph. So we did a little animation to see if that was the case. So we flattened that first photograph and overlaid it with the other image. And we could see if these markings lined up. Now, when any vehicles move into Ukraine, the numbers are painted over. So we didn't expect to see the numbers, but the kind of remaining number is still a match. The markings on the side are in the same position. There's a burn marker above the exhaust in the same position, and the damage to the rubber side skirt is also the same. And this is something no one we know has ever done before. But these rubber side skirts are made out of heavy rubber, and over time they get damaged and bent out of shape. But because of wear and tear, they have kind of they have a unique fingerprint. And we could see that these were very, very similar, apart from this part where there was this distinctive change. Now, there's possibly two reasons for this. It could be the wrong missile launcher, or there's a very significant amount of three-dimensional damage that when we flattened one of the images, it couldn't account for that damage. But we have lots of photographs and videos of this missile launcher in Russia, and if we zoom in, we can actually see that piece of damage at that same location, further confirming it's the same missile launcher. And we didn't just stop at one missile launcher. We looked at every single Buk missile launcher we could find in Ukraine and Russia and compared the side skirts, the details. None of them had the same side skirt. None of them had the same details in the same place. Now, one thing to note is, if you follow this on social media, you'll see this brought up a lot. These numbers that are painted on, these numbers are repeated throughout militaries and brigades. They're not unique to one missile launcher in the entire world. So there's multiple rocket launchers, 312s, in Ukraine and in Russia. What's important is the position of where the paint is. When those numbers were painted on, when those symbols, when that damage was done, those were in exactly the same place. And we found this and many more markings, but we only had one side of the missile launcher clearly visible, or even near to being clearly visible, in Ukraine. And then the Joint Investigation Team gave a press conference on September 28th, and they produced this video. This is the same convoy yet again. This time they've blanked out all the background, hoping no one will geolocate it. Some people have claimed to have geolocated this already, but what's really important here is we get the other side of that missile launcher that we hadn't seen in Ukraine before. And we have this video of the same missile launcher in Russia showing the same side. And this is a lovely close-up view with lots of little details. And yet again, we can find all these matches between the one in Russia and the one that's been taken in Ukraine. And we found not just these, but over a dozen matches like this on both sides of the missile launcher, confirming that it absolutely is the same one. And in the Joint Investigations Team's press conference a few weeks ago, they basically showed this presentation and said it was from Russia. But where's it from? Well, we have all the social media posts of the convoy. We could geolocate every one of them, and each one of these tags is a geolocated video or photograph. We then started looking at military units who have Buk air defense systems. And it turned out there was only one in that part of Russia, the 53rd Air Defense Brigade. These number plates, they all end up with 50, which means they're part of a specific military district, which the 53rd Air Defense Brigade is in. And the 53rd Air Defense Brigade has a social media page. So we went to their social media page and started looking for people who followed it, like this gentleman. Now, he served in 2013 and has nothing to do with MH17, but we were looking through his profile and we discovered he was actually the driver of the same truck that was seen in that convoy a year later. So back when he was serving, that was his truck, and he had lots of photographs of his truck. Now, they posted other things on social media. This was discovered on an Instagram account, and this is their attendance record for the day. So we can actually go through that and take all the names off that and plug it back into social media sites, which brings us to photographs like this. So these are people who are part of the convoy where they've tagged photographs of each other on their social media page. So what we're building up is a collection of names, photographs, ranks, positions. We found photographs of them in the actual convoy itself transporting the missile launcher that shot down MH17. Here, the guy here is that guy fast asleep there behind his friends, and he was caught on camera on someone's dashboard camera as they're driving by at the same moment. When they got to the town they were going to, Mirovo, they set up camp and started taking photographs of them next to the town sign. We also geolocated this to be sure. They completed their training exercise and they got little certificates which they posted on Instagram and vk.com. Their mothers, wives and daughters and so on and so forth have a forum to discuss how worried they are about them, and here they're discussing how worried that the 53rd Air Defence Brigade has gone to the border between 2 specific dates, and they're worried about what's happening in Ukraine. And there's lots of posts like that just telling us what they were doing. Then we had lots of photographs of them in uniform, so we could basically strip data from them. We could find, here's the logo for the 53rd Brigade. Here's the flag. What we have on the right-hand side are lapel pins that shows that anyone wearing that lapel pin is working for air defence. And that meant when we were looking through thousands of photographs and profiles, if someone had lapel pins that didn't match, we just ignored them. They were low priority. We also had images of the missile launchers that were in the convoy. We had the same missile launchers photographed by members of the 53rd Air Defence Brigade back at base, which we could geolocate. So based off all this massive amount of information, all on social media, we could start reconstructing the 53rd Brigade. So these are all the support vehicles that were part of that convoy we identified. So we have a rough idea of how many people would be in there. This is the entire structure of the 53rd Air Defence Brigade by battalion, battery, and battery. This is all based off social media posts by members of the 53rd Brigade and films filmed by Russian civilians. This means, for example, we know the missile launcher that shot down MH17 is 332. 332 is a replacement unit for the 2nd Battalion because they were missing a number of missile launchers, so they had replacement units moved in there. So the missile launcher that shot down MH17 came from the 3rd Battalion of 3rd Battery of the 53rd Air Defence Brigade. And what we also had were the names and photographs of everyone in the 53rd Air Defence Brigade, all the way down to the commanders of individual Buk missile launchers and other staff. And this is information we passed on to the Joint Investigation Team, I think 3 years ago now. So they've had this information for a long time. Finally, there's 2 sides to every story, and here's an example of the Russian side. So this you might recognize. This is from the July 21st, 2014 press conference on the down of MH17 the Russian MOD gave. And here they presented a series of effectively what were lies and distortions, and this is just one of them. This is about the Luhansk video that I showed you being geolocated earlier. And the statement they were making is this was actually filmed somewhere else. It was filmed in government-controlled territory. How do we know that? Well, on the billboard, they've actually written the address of the local car showroom. The problem is we already know what this billboard says because someone took a photograph of it. And it says something that's like branches nationwide. So they're caught in a really easy lie. Someone just went and took a photograph and said, no, it's untrue. So they made this false claim, and then after we published our work saying this is untrue, some people went out to that same billboard and took a photograph of it. And as you can see, it's had a very specific piece of vandalism following the publishing of our report. And the chimney in the background, that also was vandalized at the same time. So that's Bellingcat. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for your presentation. The floor is open for questions. Whoever has a question, please raise your hand. There's one already. There's a microphone on its way to you.
Hi, very impressive presentation. Yeah, very like, oh, this is amazing how you did it. So also thank you for this. My first question is more like, what was the main reason why you started all this? I mean, it's coming somewhere, I guess, but yeah, I'm curious why. Yeah.
So I actually started doing this as a hobby. Basically to win arguments on the internet with people. I wish there was a more noble reason for doing it. But my full story is up until about 2011, I'd been working in various administration and finance roles for various companies. Just like stuff. I was working for a company that was housing asylum seekers, and they lost their contract with the government, but I was still contracted to turn up to work for several months and just do like an hour's work a week. So I was bored out of my mind. This was in 2011 when the Arab Spring was kind of really starting up. So I just spent a lot of time on the internet on the Guardian Middle East Live blog and commenting on there and just arguing with people. And then one person said to me, how do you know where any of this stuff is filmed? And I thought, actually, how do I know that? And because I had time on my hands, it was that TG video I showed you at the start. I said, how can I know where this was filmed? So I figured out I could look at a satellite image, and maybe there's some stuff that I could see, and then that's how I figured that out. So I just really got into doing that. That's like, there's other people now who do this as a hobby. I was just doing it for, out of my own interest. Then in 2012, I decided to just start a blog just to see, really just for me to kind of order my thoughts on various things. And I like the process of writing this stuff down and doing the analysis. I had no intention of anyone ever reading it. So I called it the Brown Moses blog, which was after a Frank Zappa song. And about a year later, I was on CNN with some CNN presenter explaining exactly what Brown Moses was. So that was a weird moment. But over that time, more and more journalists and people at NGOs started seeing my work and started seeing there was interesting stuff in there. So I was like the first person to write about cluster bomb use in Syria, barrel bomb use. Then I had a really big story in 2013 where I identified weapons being smuggled to the Syrian opposition, and that became a New York Times front page. So in that 2-year period, from 2012 to 2014, I kind of I built my own reputation up. I could see other people doing this kind of investigative work who weren't getting the same attention as I was. So I decided in 2014 to launch Bellingcat, which would kind of take my more well-known name kind of out of the picture to give everyone else kind of room to get some attention. So this is when we started having contributors. But that was July 14th, 2014. So 3 days later, MH17 was shot down, and I'd been focused on Syria before then, so I didn't even know what was happening really in Ukraine, apart from there was this conflict and there was claims made by both sides. And that just ended up with, I started looking at MH17, and lots of other people who've been using open source started doing it. I invited them to write about it on my website. After a few months, the Joint Investigation Team interviewed me as a witness and asked me to go through all my posts, which I think I now realize was a free training session. And then because of that, I said to all the people who'd kind of been volunteering their time, why don't we kind of work together using a Slack channel, basically? And that was the birth of what's now the Bellingcat Investigation Team, which is kind of the core of what Bellingcat is. But it all kind of evolved very organically over time.
There's a question back there. There's the light changing.
Hi, thank you for your presentation, and thank you for your work as a citizen journalist. I see a whole range of sort of tactics being used revolving around open source information and satellite imagery. But of course, you've done your collaboration with Forensic Architecture, and I think that's an interesting example because they never work for government, and they always work with citizen groups that are local to the area where the problem is. So I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about how you choose who you work for, or what would you say no to?
I think good examples of what I would say no to. I think one problem we have as Bellingcat is we're often seen as like a journalism organisation, and whilst we do some kind of acts of journalism, what we're really about is the research and the investigation. So a lot of my work now is focused actually more on justice and accountability. So often when I'm considering, if someone comes to us with some work, I'm kind of looking, okay, what does it mean within the context of the work we're doing? So recently we had the prosecution team that's working on the International Court of Justice case come to us, Ukraine versus Russia, saying, can you look into the Mariupol shelling in 2015? It was this large number of civilian casualties. They had audio recordings, and they asked if we could look into it. So we looked into it, and we identified nearly a dozen serving Russian officers who were commanding that artillery strike from inside Ukraine. And they, from the audio recordings, it appeared they knew they were causing civilian casualties, which is a war crime. So in that case, there was a clear case where we were asked to investigate a specific incident that was already part of a legal process. We have been asked to investigate something that, in my mind, would just allow a government to point score against another government, and I'm not interested in that. I'm not there. And also, because of the work we do and the organisations we work with and sharing information with the police, like the Joint Investigation Team, I don't want to end up becoming a kind of proxy police service that the police can use anytime they want to get around their local legal restrictions. But this is a big problem, I think, moving forwards, because Bellingcat is one organisation who's doing this, and there's not really many of us at all, and Bellingcat is probably unique in how we work. What if someone decides they've got a lot of money, they want to set up into a Bellingcat-type organisation, but it focuses on, looking into certain kinds of criminals? and maybe criminals who are related to a political party, all this kind of stuff. This has actually been a point of discussion with the police before about people who kind of hunt paedophiles online and entrap them. If you ignore that as the police, then you are ignoring a crime has been committed, and what happens if one of these people goes off and does another crime? If you do something about it, what if you encourage these people to, the paedophile hunters, to keep doing it until they harass someone to death, or they get the wrong person, they kill themselves? So it's kind of a tricky area for everyone involved, because when I've spoken to the police, they are aware that what we're doing, taken to an extreme, would be problematic for them, and at the same time actually very useful for them. So we don't want to end up in a situation where we're acting as a proxy intelligence service or a proxy, police investigation team just to get around the restrictions that someone has. And this is something that I don't think is really thought about a lot, because there's so few people actually doing it. It kind of comes down to a very small group of people to discuss it among themselves.
That's changing as well, with the forensic architecture being, nominated for Turner Prize.
Yeah, I think, I have to say I would highly recommend everyone go to the Forensic Architecture website and just spend a couple of hours browsing all their projects, because they are fantastic. And we've been working with them more. I mean, we've done a few other videos with them. We're working on them with on a VR project around shootings in Hebron at the moment that we're just kind of developing. And I think this is starting to bring this issue into the light a lot more, but I still do events. I go to police events to talk about our work, because they literally don't know this is a thing that you can do. So they aren't even in the position of questioning the ethics around it. It's like magic tricks when I show them this. And that's a big, big problem. I want everyone to know about this kind of stuff so they can make decisions based off all the available information. And my experience, especially with the police at the moment, is apart from the joint investigation team, of course, they don't really have an idea of how much you can do with this.
But what are your ethics concerns around that? Because as we know, the police, and I'm assuming you're talking about the police in the UK, sharing information and tactics with the police is it's ethically tedious. We know the police to be an extremely violent institution.
Yeah, and it's the problem I have. Often the work we're doing is unique. It's not like if we don't do it, someone else will do it. When it comes down to a case where, if someone came to us with a missing persons case, like that British Virgin Islands example, if that was the police or whoever, we would try and help with that. And it's really difficult, because part of what we do at Bellingcat is trying to get more people to use this kind of information in that work, no matter who they are, because we're just approaching it from the perspective of open source as being useful for various people. And at the moment, my focus is justice and accountability, working with organizations like the ICC and IIIM on Syria. But as we're doing this, other issues are arising that we're kind of the focus for, because we're so well known, but we're like 6 employees and a dozen volunteers, and trying to define the entire scope of ethics for every single field that might use this is way above my pay ground, and it's something I think has to be discussed a lot, because I'm seeing these problems come up more and more, and it hasn't come to the point yet where we have to. The problem is that there's been a disaster because of this hasn't been addressed, but it's going to get to that point, and then it's like, whose fault is it going to be that it wasn't addressed in the first place? And for me, a part of that is coming down just to making people aware that this kind of material exists out there, for better or for worse, and that these are people who should be having the discussions about it. But, it's open source information, so we all know what's out there. We can have a discussion about it too. But some of the stuff I see, the level of information you could get, even using legitimate police investigation skills, is terrifying. I mean, we're actually currently debating an article we're publishing at the moment that we don't know if we can publish it, because it would give terrorists really good ideas about how to target people. So we're trying to reach out to the company. We've been spent like 6 months debating about what we should do with it, who we should reach out to, all these issues around it. So this, in a way, what I've shown you is the nice, easy stuff where you don't have massive ethical debates about it, but it's something we worry about all the time. And when we do have these debates at Bellingcat, we have the whole team kind of chipping in and discussing stuff and raising issues they have with it. So we kind of have a consensus decision, but we aren't ethics professors. We aren't maybe the best people to have these conversations, but it has just fallen at our feet like that.
Maybe you can tell a little bit about new technologies emerging that might give a new dimension to your work as a research collective, and maybe also the challenges that you might face in the future because of these technologies or your growing name, like more and more people would know of you and therefore maybe also target you?
Well, one of the big things we've been looking at, as I mentioned before, is justice and accountability. I've spent 6 years or so on Syria, and I've seen issues with the way evidence is collected and stored. Simply as people thinking YouTube is an internal storage device for their videos. But last summer, we had a vast number of videos from Syria deleted all at once because of a new algorithm. And that's really driven people now to think about how material is being archived from Syria. So we work with an organization called the Syrian Archive. They've developed software to allow stuff to be hosted on remote servers, not on YouTube. And at the moment, we're trying to roll that out to different organizations who are archiving material. Because what's happened is with the IIIM on Syria being formed to case build, they have a massive data management issue. They can't just have every single video on Syria sent to them directly. Because videos online alone, YouTube videos, 2 archiving organizations I know have about 2.5 million videos archived just from open sources, YouTube, Facebook. So that's a massive data management task. And a lot of this is unsorted. That's 2.5 million videos of somewhere, someplace, sometime in Syria. So we need to start adding, manually in many cases, metadata that says where it was filmed and what time. Now, it doesn't have to be the precise coordinates, but if you're looking for evidence of an event and all you have is 2.5 data-free videos, you're going to have a problem. So a big part of what we're also doing now is working with organizations with archives to help them use this new software we've developed, help them start tagging this information onto it, also creating an indexing system so they can still control their archives, but there's an index that's centralized so it can be searched. Ultimately, the kind of dream goal is for any justice and accountability organization, the IIIM, the ICC, in any conflict in the world, they can go to a map of that country, highlight an area, and say, I want all the videos that were published online at that, in that area, because I'm investigating stuff. And that will bring up all the archives that have material in this area that they can request data from. And this can be not just videos, but photographs, witness statements, other kinds of documentary evidence, and there can be different levels of access. So we could have, for example, the same system could have videos that are available for media use and are pre-screened, verified, and they've got the appropriate licensing on. Or you could have an account for someone at the IIIM who can search for witness statements, all the other details that normally wouldn't be accessible to the general user. Because what we've learned is Syria is just one conflict and it's one of many. And there's going to be more conflicts, more videos, more footage, more complex evidence to collect. And if we keep taking 6 years to figure that stuff out, like we've done with Syria, nothing's ever going to get done. So from day one, next time there's a big conflict, we want to be able to document this. So we're doing this with Syria. We're also going to start doing it with Yemen soon as well.
In a talk, just a sec. In a talk earlier today, you also mentioned artificial intelligence as something at the same time that could be a tool for you, but also frightens you a bit. Could you tell a bit more about, for instance, for scraping all these huge amounts of data and videos, how artificial intelligence could help you, or how you see it as a dangerous tool or a tool with risk? What will artificial intelligence mean for Bellingcat?
Well, one thing the Syrian Archive has been working on is machine learning on the videos they've collected to identify certain kinds of objects. So they've already trained to identify cluster munitions. So it means that you can kind of point the system at all the videos they've collected in the archive and say, okay, which ones have cluster munitions in it? And that's the kind of filtering that we can use AI and machine learning for, and that's being developed by various universities a bit too slowly, but hopefully we'll have something usable in a few years. On the other hand, if you look at the 53rd Air Defence Brigade example, that was basically 2 individuals digging through thousands of social media profiles, looking at everything manually, figuring it out in their heads. A lot of the stuff is very repetitive, and you can teach machine learning and artificial intelligence to basically scrape social media profiles, look at the photographs, see who's in uniform, then start drilling down on the details, see who's mentioning specific military units, and then just kind of display that as a network of information with priorities that can be explored. And that can be done now. It's just, I've been told someone's doing that with police, but my worry then is if, it's all great if it's Bellingcat doing it for the greater good. What happens if it's any nation gets their hand on software that can just crawl social media profiles for soldiers and figure out how they're related to each other? That's when it starts getting kind of creepy. For me, it's the boring manual tasks that we know we do now being automated, even the slightest bit, will make it much easier to do that kind of thing.
Question over there.
So, with the work you're doing, can you still live your life the normal way you'd normally do your work you'd normally do without having to fear either physical or digital intimidation or cybersecurity attacks or whatever?
I've got pretty much all of those already, apart from the physical intimidation. We've had multiple attacks on our email accounts by Fancy Bear, the Russian-backed hackers, like literally hundreds of them, just phishing emails being sent non-stop. We've had Russia Today and Sputnik has done various hit pieces on me and Bellingcat. We've had quite a lot in Russian state media as well, talking about the work of Bellingcat. The Russian Foreign Ministry has attacked our work. The Russian Ministry of Defense has attacked our work. I think Dmitry Peskov, Vladimir Putin's spokesperson, may have even said something about our work. So we get a lot of grief from the Russian government. I've been targeted by the Internet Research Agency. Back in a couple of years ago, around, I think it was the 2016 anniversary of MH17, I think they were kind of preempting me writing something on MH17 because the anniversary was coming up. So over a 24-hour period, there were about 40 articles written about me on Russian social media sites, half of which we knew were linked to the Internet Research Agency, the St. Petersburg Troll Factory, through various other reporting and investigations. But because they were all published at the same time, using the same talking points and often the same spelling mistakes, it was possible to identify these other 20 accounts as being part of this same network of Internet Research Agency accounts. So in the end, that had really zero impact on the work we were doing, but it gave us a kind of lead into identifying a bunch of troll accounts. So often, even when we're being attacked, we're looking at it as a, what is this data telling us about the people attacking us more than anything else? And in the case of MH17, they've attacked us saying that we use fakes and false images. Anytime I've asked them for evidence of that, the first time in 2016, they sent me some plagiarized blog posts as their answer. That's the quality of Russian Foreign Ministry evidence on MH17. And this time round, they sent me one, this UN representative from Russia said, oh, the shadows look a bit funny in this photograph. And he was promptly torn apart on Twitter. But this is the level they're at. It's like, this is why they're so scared of going to court, because I think one thing that's been quite useful is the Russian defense has been handily crowdsourced by all their supporters on social media, because they've come up with every single possible scenario about what could have happened to MH17, all of which has given us time to review them and debunk them well ahead of any actual court case. So I've no idea what Russia's going to do if they actually try and defend themselves in any court. Because if they go up and say, oh, all the images are fake, that's not going to get them very far.
What you showed us today, how could maybe that be used in a court of law? Do you wish for a future where this kind of evidence or research plays a bigger role in law cases? Yeah, and I think, I mean, there is a question about how, if you have a case purely based off open sources, if that's ever going to work, and I suspect probably not, because if you can't find any witnesses to support your case, it's going to make it difficult. Like the Wafali arrest warrant, they don't stop looking, they don't find the 6 videos and say job done and go home. That's just the start of their investigation. They'll be reaching out to people in Libya to find witnesses, evidence, prove that there was no proper trial for these people. So often open source information can be a very good starting point, and sometimes it can offer a lot of information about an incident, but we should never end up just worshipping at this altar of open source information too much, because there's other stuff out there and that's can be just as useful.
Yeah, well, you said you were working together with 6 colleagues, right?
6 at the moment. We're expanding to 10 soon, though.
All right. Then even more important, I think, my question. How are you getting funded?
So about half our income comes from workshops we run, which are 5-day workshops. So if you ever want to sign up to those, thank you. And about the other half currently is coming from the Open Societies Foundation, the National Endowment for Democracy, Adesium, and Pax for Peace. So those are kind of our main 4 funders at the moment. Generally, our funding will come from foundations, and so I've spoken to like Sigurd Rousing, Oak, Midyar, those kind of organisations for funding. So as much as I wish it were true, a lot of people have the perception that people are throwing money at Bellingcat, but most of my work is going out, speaking to potential funders and explaining stuff over a period of months to them. So yeah, that's a big part of it.
Did you ever refuse funding because it was from a party that you didn't want to be associated with, or that would probably damage your independent position?
One difficult thing is now is there's, in the disinformation space, so we call it, there are lots of government funding for anti-disinformation campaigns. And I think generally they aren't very effective because it's usually the same 6 stories recycled by another web portal that no one visits. And if you want to fight disinformation, you've got to actually do investigations, not just find some tweet that from 2 years ago that's not true. The problem is, we don't take that money because it's government money. So instead it goes to all these think tanks and foundations who are just spending it to basically have the money and hire staff and recycle the same 6 articles about the same stuff over and over. So to us, it's really frustrating seeing that because we know we could do more with the money, but we won't take government money directly at least. Like the National Endowment for Democracy gets funding from Congress, but there is steps in between that before it gets to us. But I mean, I just don't feel comfortable taking direct funding from governments. The only thing that's really frustrating is there has been offers to Bellingcat from government saying, we'd love to fund you, and I've just said no straight away. And then, like, our community of rather hostile people on social media are constantly telling me about how much money I'm getting from the British government and the CIA and all these other people. And it's just not the case. We say no all the time to offers like that. And it gets more and more frustrating when, I mean, some of these projects are huge and they go off to some company you've never heard of who produces a website and you'd never hear anything about again. And it's like 3 or 4 times Bellingcat's yearly budget for this crap project they do. So, but hey, it's your taxpayers' money that I can't take, so.
Question actually a bit in line with your story. You typically expose lies from government. Russian, we've seen US bombing a mosque or not, even ISIS. How do you watch the news these days? Do you believe what you see? Or are you always hesitant on what to believe or not?
I honestly barely actually watch the news anymore. I've kind of, especially on Syria, because news on Syria is always completely just wrong. Well, if it's not wrong, it just doesn't reflect the true situation. Like, quick show of hands here. Chemical attacks in Syria. Who thinks there's been more than 10 chemical attacks in Syria? Just a show of hands. More than 10. Who thinks there's been more than 20? Keep your hands up. 50? 100? 200? From studies we've been doing, it could be all the way up to 200, if not more. Now, what you use to rank whether or not a chemical attack has happened is the tricky one to answer. But even if you're looking ones at confirmed by the UN Commission of Inquiry, that's over 30 separate chemical attacks. And there's loads you never hear about because not enough people die. This Douma chemical attack that's got people all riled up, 2 meters to the left or right, that would have missed that building and there would have been no casualties and you wouldn't even know about Douma at the moment. It's simple as that. It's pure luck that you get 1 person dying or 100 people dying in these attacks. And one thing that is frustrating is just the way that kind of the news approaches this, because most journalists don't have a clue about this anyway, unless you're one of about 10 people who like really kind of nerd out about the use of chemical weapons in Syria. You aren't going to hear about this stuff. If you read it, you might read about it in a report that maybe 1,000 people read, but there'll just be like some little factoid in your brain. And that's just one example where the understanding of the conflict in Syria, in particular, is just completely alien to the relation of what's really going on in Syria. And there's plenty of other examples like that. And, you know, just in general, it really is hard to watch the news knowing that it's usually being produced by people who aren't really experts in what they're talking about. They have deadlines to meet. They can't spend a really long time working on the stuff. And that's just how the news works.
But that's the media. Okay, different question there, but that's media. I would assume that we have our intelligence, or government intelligence, who are having the same information as you, and that our minister or Minister of Defense or whoever actually has that information and knows it's over 200 of those chemical attacks. I'm not comparing you to any other journalist of a newspaper. Or, those who are empowered to do things should have that same information, right? Or are you that unique that even our...
I think you are making a bit of an assumption, but unfortunately, based on my experience, they do, especially probably less in the last couple of years, but I think certainly prior to 2014, this information was really not being used in the way you see me using it now. I think there's been more interest in the last couple of years. A lot of it is being driven by how governments feel on certain subjects. So the UK has got a lot more interested in this since the Skripal poisoning. And they've been a lot more interested in it since the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. Before then, they didn't really even know it was much of a thing. And also, considering when you produce an intelligence product, if you have open source information that's then combined with classified information, the whole thing's classified. So often what people are seeing are unclassified summaries of information. That might include a whole bunch of open source stuff, but they're never going to see it because it's been bundled in a classified bundle. So I think it was really apparent as well around the August 21st, 2013 sarin attacks, because I was doing a ton of investigation. I had videos of the munitions, I had trajectories, all kinds of stuff going on. And then the White House released a 2-page kind of report on it, and lots of journalists expected the White House kind of report to include all this cool open source stuff, and it didn't at all. And that kind of dissonance between what people were seeing that I was putting out and what the US government was putting out, and this includes journalists who are specialized in this subject, was really disturbing, because it then seemed like the US government didn't know what it was talking about whilst I was waving around videos of the actual rockets used and stuff like that. So I think this is something that's they're kind of catching up, but we're still kind of running forwards with it as well. So it's kind of, we're in a weird kind of race at the moment.
So I was wondering, how does the fake news rhetoric affect you and Bellingcat?
Well, often that's coming from the direction of Russia. So most people, I think in one way we're fortunate because I built up a reputation before Bellingcat. So lots of journalists knew who I was. So as soon as we started being attacked, they had already recognized that we were producing valuable work, and therefore it just made the attacks make us look like we're doing good work. Unfortunately, we've kind of carried that through over the last several years. I mean, there are still plenty of people who hate us and the work we do and say it's all fake, but they're really in the minority, and they certainly aren't part of kind of sensible discourse on any issues. So really for us, it's just been an opportunity to expose fake news more than actually worry about being targeted by accusations of producing it. But I think on the whole fake news thing, people just spend so much time talking about fake news and that everything is just one problem to be solved with a clever, couple of photographs of finding the original videos. That's just the starting point for anything, really. That's like the basics of what should be done every single day. And you can do a hell of a lot more with the information that's out there.
But it seems so easy, though. Like, you're doing such revelatory work and such thorough investigation, but somehow it seems like even when something is obviously true, Trump, for example, can say, oh, that's fake news, and many people will believe it. So
now, with that, I kind of split people into two groups. Those who are kind of driven more by their faith in a particular topic or individual, and those who are kind of more fact-based in how they come to conclusions. Now, you see, and I think a lot of this comes down to a kind of form of toxic fandom that the internet has kind of encouraged. So pretty much on any single topic on the internet, you're always going to have a group of people who are completely fanatical about it. And they're going to find other people on the internet who are equally fanatical. And they will demonstrate their worth to each other by extreme acts. Now, this could be, for example, are you familiar with Rick and Morty? Yeah, so it's a cartoon series. It's got a really horrible fan base. And McDonald's did an unofficial tie-in with a special kind of dipping sauce. And they did this in America, and they advertised it and made a big thing. So you had all these, rabid Rick and Morty fans turn up. They got there and they found that they'd run out. So then they started filming themselves jumping up and down in front of McDonald's employees, screaming at them in the face and sharing it with each other. They were demonstrating their value by proving they were the true fan. Now, what does this have to do with anything else, you're wondering? It's the same behavior you see with all these different groups. Trump supporters, you say, oh, maybe Trump isn't quite the genius we think he is. No, you're out the group. You're shouted at. You're called a traitor and a Democrat. You get people talking about Assad. And you say, maybe Assad did some of these chemical weapons attacks. And they say, no, that's completely untrue. It's all fake news. It's all conspiracy. So what ends up happening, normally in normal life, if you met people like that, eventually you'd run out of friends. But you've got a whole internet out there of people with your opinion. Now, in the case of Syria, when you have people denying chemical weapons attacks, what you then have is Russia coming along saying, yes, you're right, come on Russia Today to talk about it. Or why don't you pop over to the United Nations and tell us how the white helmets are all terrorists? So groups that would normally not have that kind of platform are given that platform. That then starts entering mainstream discourse because you see some people who might see that and say, oh, actually, I trust Russia Today. He's at the UN. That must mean they're a serious person. And it enters their thought process. And then they're saying to their friends, I heard that the white helmets are all terrorists. And it's all come from basically a group of crazy people, extremists on the internet. And it's the same with Putin, Assad, the Flat Earth, Rick and Morty, ISIS. It's all people who focus on their faith, not the actual facts, and that the facts have become toxic to them.
So would indeed more facts help? Because when you talk about your work, is basically showing us that anyone can do this, right? If you have a lot of time, it's a hobby, anyone can do this. So eventually facts will prevail, and that will do the groundwork. That will help us go forward. But what you also say now is that there's so many people who will just basically go in denial and say, well, yeah, sure, that's your story.
Yeah, I mean, this is, again, extremes of this kind of spectrum. So it's not like there's always going to be people like that, but there's always going to be people you can reach out to. And one thing I found very effective when we're looking at fake information being shared is being able to respond to it quickly before it becomes kind of a meme and just it becomes uncontrollable. One example of that is after the Duma chemical attack, there were photographs published showing members of the White Helmets on a film set with like a makeup lady. And even Russian TV news was saying this is evidence that the White Helmets are producing fake videos, like the most ridiculous evidence ever. Turned out there were actually production stills from a film about fake news in Syria that was being produced basically to claim that the White Helmets are fake news. So it's basically fake news about fake news in a film about fake news. But because we were able to put an article out about that within about 8 hours of it becoming a thing, and I have a kind of audience who is very engaged with Syria, engaged with Russia, and basically argue with people online all the time. I was kind of, in a way, in the kind of information war that's happening, I was giving them weapons to use, ammunition, by writing that article, that fact check. So anytime someone posted those photographs, people were like, no, actually, here's all the links, here's all the information. And it shut that down really quickly. So it is possible to start shutting some stuff down. I think, in a way, there's really a tiny amount of people doing this work anyway, but being part of a community that's kind of engaged with this and you're growing all the time, and I've seen this happening over the last few years, of people who, they really care about the truth and they also like arguing with people on the internet. Those are the people you have to find, because then you equip them with what they need to tell the truth and they will share it relentlessly for years. So in a way, if you think of it like a biological system, you're kind of teaching, it's the antivirus you're teaching the organism to use.
So would 10 people be enough?
Oh no, you need about 1 million. So we are in trouble, but no. It varies a lot. A lot of it is just being a voice in a community that's respected. It's like with Bellingcat, if we do a debunk, lots of journalists see that and they'll share it and share it with each other. Another example I give is a Russian MOD tweet saying they had irrefutable proof that the US Air Force was protecting ISIS. One of the screenshots was from a computer game. So this irrefutable evidence was from a computer game. But as soon as they made that tweet, people were replying saying this is from a computer game. Because 2 weeks earlier, someone else had shared the same video saying it was the US attacking a convoy. And I had pointed out that this tweet got like 100,000 retweets. But I quoted it and I was saying this is a computer game video. And that got maybe like 1,000 retweets. But they were journalists who actually follow the Russian MOD on social media. So when the Russian MOD made that claim, they had seen that video, they'd shared that video, they reacted to it immediately. And it's the only time I've seen the Russian Ministry of Defense retract images and admit they're not actually real. They claimed it as just like an error, they put the pictures up, but it was a retraction, and I've never seen that before, and that's because they got absolutely piled on because of that.
One last question, maybe. If it's not from the audience, it can be from me. I mean, a lot of the debates around post-truth are also how, I mean, the traditional outlets of information, newspapers, TV channel, can still remain places for investigative journalism, for in-depth fact-checking and research, in this new dynamic of which I think very much the internet is contributing to, where social media plays a bigger role, where feelings are sometimes more important than facts. What would you say, what can these traditional media outlets learn from Bellingcat? What would you wish for that they would copy from you?
Probably not too much, but it's nice to be unique. But a good example of it was what the New York Times is currently doing with the Malachi Brown's unit. They've been around for a while, and they're using kind of open source information and analysis, and this kind of work I'm showing you to produce videos on a range of topics. One of the best one they've done is on the Las Vegas shootings, where they took all the video footage and the phone calls from the police, all that information, and turned it into a timeline. It's something very simple, but where you present that information like that, it's very powerful. They've actually just released a piece on the April Duma chemical attack, which includes work from forensic architecture that's also very good. But I think if news organizations want to do this kind of work, they need to have specific units dedicated to it. This is not something you can have someone spending an hour a day doing. It's something they have to do every single day, all the time. And I think if they want to do this work, that's what they have to do. But broader, the discussion about the post-truth world, I mean, have we ever lived in a world that's truthful? I think that's what always comes up with this. But really, in a way, this is about the internet and how information is shared on the internet and what we consider to be a healthy internet. And how we get to that point. And I don't think passing loads of laws and legislation saying you can't lie on the internet is going to work. I think it's about creating healthy communities who talk to each other, who share information, and that's a long-term project. And if we expect people to go into school, have their first smartphone when they're 11 or 12, spend 6 years on it, and then come out on the other end, without discussing it and learning about the internet, it's going to be, I think we're going to keep seeing this pattern repeating. So I think it's important to engage with young people and actually talk about these issues now. This is the environment they exist in. So I think if we don't talk to them about it, we can't be surprised when it's full of InfoWars and Donald Trump.
Thank you very much, Elliot Higgins, for a wonderful presentation.
Thank you.